our speaker today. Dr. Nicole Wagner is an assistant professor of agricultural sciences at Texas State University. With a background in quantitative agroecology and engineering, her research focuses on whole complex systems that integrate plant and soil health practices for human health, including the use of biological soil amendments in low disturbance growing methods. Dr. Wagner founded and now manages Bobcat Farm, a fruit and vegetable farm at Texas State University. Today, she will discuss processes for regenerating soil and water in a Texas context and how this endeavor is part of building a larger applied research program. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Nicole Wagner.
Thank you all so much. It's really fun to be here. So my background is really interdisciplinary. So I have found that to be a challenge, but also really, really fun to look at whole systems. So yes, my background is agroecology, very quantitative, minor in statistics, a lot of computer modeling, and then agricultural engineering with a focus on minor in horticulture, also focus on soil and water. And so I feel like it's bringing all of that together, and I want to kind of share some of the things I've learned along the way. So just when I see the challenges in agriculture and horticulture, there's like three main things that come to mind. And the number one challenge right now is soil health. And so on the left, right, we have this beautiful like sponge of carbon and life. And on the right is just a very classic, like this is what we deal with. We have our vertisols, we have our shrink swelling soils with a lot of clay, low organic matter, compacted. We have our, lacking biodiversity in the microbial life, et cetera. So just to describe on the left here, we have, high diversity, we have aggregation in our soil particles structured. And really what this means is that when it rains, we keep the water, and in that soil holds on to water. And thus we have functioning carbon, water, and nutrient cycles. We have nutrient cycling happening. And over here is kind of the opposite. So we can have microbial extinction events on the right. Low biodiversity, we've got clods. When it rains, just the soil particles can just fall apart. It's the slake test. And then when we get precipitation and we get our big downpours here in Texas, we start to see a lot of runoff. So even if we get enough precipitation, it can still feel like a drought just because our soil's not absorbing all that water. And basically what this means is we've got a broken hydrologic cycle, and thus also carbon and nutrient cycles are not happening. And I love this quote from Xenophon, who was a student of Socrates and also a philosopher, a military leader. And he said, to be a successful farmer or successful grower is also how I interpret that. One must first know the nature of soil. So I want to start here and then weave in plant health and human health. Oops. So this is just, so I teach soil science classes. And this is just an image from our textbook. And some of you may know this image. From this just classic, the Brady and Wheel textbook. And even though this is a grazing example, you can see here two distinct management styles, right? On the left, we've got green growth, we've got no standing water, and on the right, you see all this bare soil, water is not being infiltrated. And this really illustrates what I'm talking about in terms of when we don't have functioning carbon, water, and nutrient cycles, we can see the effects of our crops and also then the health of our crops and thus health of people. And when I say that, I'm like food crops, but I also grow flowers too. So lost my shirt so for today. So again, like I said, it's not how much rain we get, but it's how much rain we keep. It's like, it's not about how much money you make, it's how much money you get to keep, right? So, just talking a little bit about the hydrologic cycle, we see over lifetimes and generations, even beyond human lifetimes in the geologic scale, we see climates changing. And this is also just a classic example from like Jared Diamond's work, Easter Island, right? So we have all these trees and the vegetation got changed, and that changed the climate, and there's no longer a civilization there. So these small water cycles, so we think about the large hydrologic cycle, how water moves through the environment, but really it's about, even at a smaller scale, how we are managing our land that is changing how water moves through our system, and thus changing our own local climates. So again, another more um, maybe a case study that resonates a little bit closer to home is also the San Joaquin Valley in California, which is a major producer. And that has changed over time. The climate has changed over time. Used to receive more cool marine air. And so just talking about a little bit of like the ramifications for changing our vegetation, and then also leaving soil bare, because that then is not only about the land and the plants, but also how water moves through our whole ecosystem. And like the climatologist, and also he's a soil microbiologist, Walter Hanney, he's Australian, I believe, or from New Zealand. He says the climate and atmosphere are driven by microbes and vegetation, not just physics or dead stuff. And I love this because it's the integration of all these disciplines to really understand how to manage our ecosystems holistically. And then this is a great study from the University of California. And this just also illustrates something more, again, more in modern times. On the left here, you can see the greener growth underneath these oak trees that really give you an indication of the hydraulic redistribution of water through the soil profiles, right? Which is just this amazing phenomenon. And so when we change the vegetation, we start to see things happening where we don't have this water moving up from deeper in the soil profile. And this study in particular showed that removal of oak trees resulted in a rapid deterioration of soil quality, with the majority of the losses occurring between 10 to 20 years after tree removal. And this is just something to, again, you know, whatever crops we may be growing, it might be annual, it might not be perennials, might not be an agroforestry example, but I think this is a really important illustration of all of the dynamics at play when we talk about growing plants, and growing plants that are healthy. Another thing too, and how we're managing our lands, is we're seeing a lot of dust storms. And again, this is our topsoil being eroded. And not only is this a problem in terms of, okay, this topsoil is moving away, but these hazes actually interfere with the coalescing of water vapor in the atmosphere on nucleation sites and then falling back down as rain. So again, this is a big problem. Again, this is some of the work of Walter Henney, and it just has implications for how we also manage some of our crops, some of our agronomic crops, with a lot of burning. One of the things that I'll talk about just briefly later is just some of my interest in biochar. Amanda and I have talked about this too, and Dr. Dingra, and the idea of like reducing those carbon particulates in the atmosphere, and just different ways to manage our biomass that comes from our agricultural production. Again, just more and more, these are just, modern events. We think of the Dust Bowl being like the quintessential, like we've come back from that, we're doing great. However, we still see a lot of these images of soil particles moving. Okay, so I don't know, how many of you are familiar with Dr. David Montgomery? He's a geomorphologist. So he's done some amazing work, and he wrote a series of books on soil. And he was at the University of Washington, I believe. And from a geologist's perspective, which was so great, is like really beyond the human lifetime. He's studying the changes of soil, out in geologic history. And so one of the main takeaways, and he's got 3 books, he's an amazing writer, done a lot of research, is he said a net soil erosion under conventional agriculture of 1 millimeter a year, it doesn't seem like much. Over time, the erosion of 1.5 to 1 meter thick, which is very thick soil, would take 500 to 1,000 years. And this is exactly this lifespan of most of the major civilizations throughout history, human civilizations throughout history. So it's just this really amazing correlation here. And in his book, he said, with rare exceptions, the fields of all countries have been made to bear their crops without the least reference to the interests of future generations. And again, so this is something really important for us to, even though it might be something we don't see within our lifetime, to be aware of with our management practices. A little bit more about the hydrologic cycle. So the reason we want to store more carbon in the soil is not only for the carbon sequestration, but really to influence the way that water moves throughout our environment, back to the hydrologic cycle. And from Climate Science 101, it's actually water vapor that governs 95% of the heat dynamics of Earth. And this is, NASA talks about this as well. We really laser focused on carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide is important. Carbon sequestration is important, but it's also integrated with water. And of course, in Texas, we know that water, we get it all at once, and then we don't get it for a long time. So paying attention to this is really important. And I want to, show some slides of some of the changes of our climate, just to then set the tone for the next part of my talk. So the National Climate Assessment is led by NOAA, NASA, and the Department of Energy, but there are like 60 different agencies, researchers that are involved in these reports that come out, and they're quite stunning. They have not only, projections, but real data showing changes over time. So one of the simulations that they did here was projected change % in seasonal precipitation. And what I see here, which is concerning, is here in Texas. Let me see if I can. You can see it right here. Okay, so our winters are getting drier. This is, again, a simulation. This is a model. I used to model. Of course, you have to have good assumptions, right? There's always, modeling error, but still, this is good to pay attention to here, is that our winters are getting drier, and they're showing that the springs are drier, summer and fall changes in the negative percentages here. And this report citation here says this pattern of projected precipitation change arises because of changes in locally available water vapor. So back to the importance that water vapor plays in our precipitation, moving through our soil system, etc. And thus we have shifts in water in our weather systems. And again, now back to actually observed precipitation, we can see, okay, this makes sense to us. Heavy precipitation events that we experience here in Texas. Of course, we're kind of a land of extremes. We all know this, so y'all know this. And then the other thing that's a challenge with growing crops is our increase in frost-free season lengths, which is a problem too, especially for, chilling and, chill requirements for our fruits, etc. So another one here, increases in frost-free season length correspond to similar increases in growing season length, again from NOAA, etc. Okay, so what does this all mean? Well, the impacts of climate variability mean that we have challenges ahead, right? You all know this. This is review. We've got more overwintering pests. We've got higher temperatures that stress plants that we've got to deal with, photorespiration, all of these things that kick in and will cause nutrient uptake to decline, etc. And these things can increase disease pressure as well. We have extensive dry periods. We know this in Texas. This increases our yield, especially for critical points of influence with fruit fill and things like that. Nutrition during, as well as nutrition in terms of growing the healthiest plants we can as food for medicine, etc. And then also just increase CO2, that can be good for plants, but also increases our weed pressure, right? So these are actually kale I grew, dino kale. On the left is a healthy, like really wide leaf. Amazing. That actually is a great qualitative or in quantitative analysis of the leaves. And then over here on the right, we see a lot of pest pressure because of the plant stress, nutritionally deficient, et cetera, just dealing with all of the things that we deal with. I want to come back to a little bit of what we're observing in these two photos in just a little bit here. But then that brings us to our third human challenge, because when I think about growing fruits and vegetables in particular, really food being medicine, being of the highest nutritional density, that we are getting enough nutrients for human consumption and then also to animals as well. And we see the, increased, diet related chronic diseases. And then not only is this a health issue, but also an economic issue as shown on the right. We see this increase in healthcare spending costs. And if you've ever seen the amount that we spend on food and the amount we spend on healthcare, they've gone opposite over the decades. Okay, another thing too, and this is by an MIT researcher, Stephanie Seneff, and again, just looking at the increases in autoimmune diseases, et cetera. And these are things you probably already know. She does a lot with toxicity, et cetera. Some of her stuff is, you may disagree, agree, but I think that these data are interesting to get us to, to look at more carefully. And these are correlations. So that doesn't mean causation, but it still is something that is important data for us to be considering when we think about the health of our food supply and our fruits and vegetables. So that brings me then back to Steve Jobs and this slide here when we think about, okay, so how are we going to repair this ecosystem on the right? And I love this quote. He said, if you define the problem correctly, you almost have the solution. So what are the questions we're asking in terms of research, how to regenerate this ecosystem? And one question comes to mind is, how do we repair our water, carbon, and nutrient cycles for restoring soil health, thus plant health, and also human health, right? Okay, so I have some more case studies that are kind of fun. So this was the Barnett Shale pipeline restoration in 2002. And what you see here is that a company got the winning bid, and they were to regenerate, or I should say revegetate this pipeline. And they brought in sugar sand that was basically dirt. It didn't have any biology. And they seeded it. And you see all of the hydro seeding kind of like when it rained and when the winds came up, you see all of the seeds ended up here. And then a big precipitation event happened, and this is what was shown on the left. So that didn't go very well. And then another company, Sustainable Growth Texas, which was run by Betsy Ross, who was one of my mentors for a while, and she worked with soil microbiologist Elaine Ingham. 6 weeks later, her company came in and did something a bit different. They added, you can see here, some water, just to add water into that ecosystem. And they also then hydroseeded the seeds out, but also added a microbial inoculant with it. And it had a lot more success with restoring the life in that soil, because dirt is dead, it doesn't have life. The definition of soils, it has to have that biology there. So this is before and after, which is really an interesting case study. Another interesting case study, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Darren Doherty. He's a permaculturalist, and he's worked all around the world in these landscapes that are really dry and even have more of a bigger challenges than we do, like in Jordan. And what is shown here is you see how green this little area is, this little oasis that over 10 years he restored. And you can see that they're capturing all of they're capturing all of the precipitation in this area through all this rainwater collection, et cetera. So it was so fun to see all the rainwater collection, the various things that you have here that Mason showed me. It was wonderful. You can imagine how challenging this environment is. I would imagine that even their irrigation water is probably so full of like carbonates and bicarbonates, just some of the things that we deal with. And so anyway, his work is, again, it's like restoring that localized microclimate, water cycle, how water moves through the soil. So then this brings me to some other case studies here. And I'm really intrigued by some of what we can learn from the permaculturalist in terms of restoring our soil to then have higher yields, better economics, plants that are healthier and have reduced insect pressure and disease pressure. So the reason I bring this up to here too is some of the work that I'm doing at the ranch. We have a ranch at Texas State, is because that's a pretty degraded ecosystem, and thinking about all the techniques that we can do there to restore this ranch, but then also this small little fruit and vegetable farm that I run there too. And we can see here, what we're looking at here is on the left, we have got water catchment ponds, and we've got swales being basically these like terraces that were formed to slow down water, catch water. And then keyline, like a yeoman's plow right here, minimizing disturbance, but breaking up compaction layers. And on the right is just, just adaptive management grazing that can also, using animal impact to restore soils. Okay, so then just to bring it back then is, what if we learn from nature that then we can, to the best of our abilities, of course, because agriculture is influenced by human, there are disturbance events, we can't get around it, but what are the things that we can try to institute in our production practices that then bring us to a more functioning set of cycles? So on the left here, this is wheat, a wild relative of wheat, and you see how long that root system is compared to agriculture on the right. Have you seen that picture before? Yeah, yeah. And I love this picture. So you probably know this, armor on the soil surface, all of the things that we want to try to do in our horticultural, agricultural systems. Armor on the soil surface, not leaving the soil bare, a living root in the ground for as long of the year as possible to really foster that community underground, feed the microorganisms through the root exudates, promoting diversity above and below ground, and really feeding the soil to feed plants, to feed animals and humans. And then that brings me then to how we are assessing our soil. So treating soil as a biology lab, not just only as a chemistry lab. And maybe you've seen this. How many people have seen this picture? Okay, many of you have. So this is just a remarkable photo that a lot of us have seen, but we've known about mycorrhizae for a long time. This is a pine seedling with just this, showing this amazing surface area through the synergies with the mycorrhizal community. And this is just from this source here, how appropriate that at the turn of the century that has overseen a second industrial revolution in agriculture, there's an increasing appreciation of the central role played by the mycorrhizal symbiosis first described in the latter part of the 19th century. And that's from that date. So we've known about this for a while. Interestingly as well, the Human Genomic Project really ushered in, though, understanding similarities here with the importance of our microbial community, the human microbial community, and then also soil. Soil health kind of got stuck for a while, and I think this was really influential, seeing some of the parallels between humans and soil. Just like with humans, low soil microbial diversity is linked to susceptibility to pests and diseases, low nutrients, poor plant productivity. So for both these environments, both soil and humans, the health of that landscape, that ecosystem, is dependent on this diversity of this microbial community. And if we look just in like a review, we see here just showing just a snapshot of similarities of the microbiomes of the human gut and of plant roots. And this is just fascinating. Again, back to David Montgomery. So Ray Archuleta, Gabe Brown's son, and Blackley, they did this is a relatively recent paper. And they were looking at soil health and nutrient density. And so now here, just kind of going into that next topic that I wanted to address, though, is talking about growing the healthiest plants possible. Not only the healthiest plants possible that grow big yields, but that also are so healthy that we can reduce the amount of time, energy, and money that we spend managing pests and diseases. And they did this comparison, preliminary, however, so a lot more work needs to be done here. But they found that the nutritional profiles of crops and livestock really differ based on different growing methods. This makes sense to us. So anyway, they study different farms between looking at soil health and crop nutrient density between synthetically fertilized and herbicide treated farms and regenerative farms. And not to say that, you know, we have all the tools in our toolbox, but how do we most optimize them so that whether they're conventional or organic, and there's not either or, but what tools can we use to grow the healthiest crops possible? And what they found was interesting is that they found differences. The farms that focused on some of those soil health principles that I talked about produced crops with higher organic soil organic matter levels, higher soil health scores, and higher levels of certain vitamins, minerals, and phytochemicals. And then they also compared some of these nutrient density profiles with produce from the supermarket, and again, found differences. But the devil's in the details here. This is very complex. This is preliminary. There's been a lot of work on this, and it's just not so black and white, clearly, but it's pretty intriguing. And there's another organization that's been working in this space for quite a while, the Bionutrient Association. And what they found, and I was talking to their chief science officer the other day, is just fascinating. I think it can really inform academic research. That's why I really like to learn more about what these different organizations are doing, what these farmers are doing, boots on the ground people that are tinkering and they're experimenting and they're seeing things, and how that can help to influence some of our research and our questions, like Steve Jobs said, you know, asking the right questions. And what this is saying here is that they just found that there's a wide variety of nutrient density just based on how things are grown. So they found that basically in this illustration, the number by each crop indicates how many in the lower end of the variation one would have to consume to equal one in the higher end. So there's a lot of variation just in the nutrient density of all of our produce. Again, it's not black or white, but just something that could be future research tracks to look more closely at. Then this brings me to some of the work of John Kempf. Is anybody familiar with the plant health pyramid? Anybody? Okay, some of you are. Okay, so I find his work so fascinating too. So here he is, a crop consultant that has at his fingertips tens of thousands of soil tests to look through. So, you know, as an academic, our research is expensive, but here he is, not an academic researcher, but he's got all this data that he's been looking at for years and years. And he came up with this plant health pyramid based on his findings. And I think it would be so fascinating to do more research to actually document some of this, you know, either prove or disprove some of it in a scientific, you know, in a scientific realm. But basically what he has found is that in order to get plants at the peak of their immunity, like humans that are resistant to diseases and pests, like a disease suppressive soil, these things need to happen, which is what? Complete photosynthesis, having higher rates of photosynthesis, and only at that point can we achieve complete protein synthesis. And then the next level up, when we have complete protein synthesis, we can have increased lipid synthesis, which does all kinds of things, which is like waxier cuticles that can resist various enzymes being applied to them by pests. And then once that happens, the peak, which I have never obtained, still working on it, I think it takes a long time, a lot of practice, is this increase in plant secondary metabolites. So the lower two is basically balancing our minerals, like the Albrecht method of having a balanced mineral profile. I mean, sometimes we can never obtain this, of course, but then the two upper levels are really focused on active biology in the soil profile. And I won't go through all of this. I know I have a lot of slides here. If there's any questions, we can come back to this. But what I find really fascinating, and this is from his data, is that when plants at level 1 have adequate nutrients in plant available form, things start to happen. He's witnessed a reduction of soil-borne fungal pathogens and an increase in photosynthetic rate. And granted, a proxy for that would be bricks. It's not perfect, but again, that would be something that we could look at more closely. Plant sap analysis would be another one. At level 2, he sees that now the plants start to become resistant to insects with simple digestive systems. This is like our larval feeding insects, sucking insects, hornworms, corn borers, aphids. They simply cannot, their digestive symptoms simply cannot handle complex sugars. And then at level 3, this is where we have more of an aggressive plant microbiome in the rhizosphere. And so the plants start to absorb nutrients actually from the nutrient cycling happening with the microbiology here, which is pretty amazing. And the majority of their nutrition starts to become from these microbial metabolites. This is the soil food web that Elaine Ingham basically coined, and our NRCS has talked about, et cetera. And then at the 4th level is that we now have resistance to the entire beetle family. I think that would be like amazing to ever get to that point. But anyway, so that is like the goal. And I just want to focus on level 3 for a moment here, is that I love this image of a root and the root hairs and all of them, the microbial community, and this is from the University of Nebraska. And just to focus on, plants require a very aggressive plant microbiome to get to this place where they're absorbing their nutrition from microbial metabolites. And some farmers have actually achieved this. This seems like somehow not even possible, but farmers who have been working on this for years are actually starting to reduce or even eliminate some of their fertilizers in some of the agronomic crops. And I think that is really so fascinating. Another thing just that also has been recently discovered by James White at Rutgers University is that plants actually absorb bacteria, and literally absorbing through the rhizophagy cycle, that they are absorbing these bacteria and getting their nutrients from them, and then spitting out these bacteria back into the soil without their cell walls. I mean, it's fascinating work. And if you haven't, this hasn't crossed your desk, it's incredible work here. So he's been discovering these like groundbreaking understandings of how plants obtain nutrition. And it's pretty fun because we thought plants were vegetarian, right? But this goes against that. So then that brings me to actually then, how are we assessing our soil? How are we assessing our soil and the ecosystem? And so there are tests that we've been doing. Again, this is talking about soil as a biology lab, not only a chemistry lab. It's an integrated lab. We're looking at the biochemistry, and then maybe at some point we can even start talking about the physics. But the traditional chemistry test tells us a piece of the puzzle, but we can go further in terms of some recent, well, relatively recent soil tests like the Haney test and some others that are actually starting to quantify some of the biology and the metabolites of the biology that are really telling us more about what's happening in the soil so that we can assess this better. And Liz Haney, along with Rick Haney, who discovered the Haney test, they're using the Haney test, so out of the USDA ARS lab, Soil Health Lab, Temple, Texas. They are using, Liz is a consultant, and they are using the Haney test to prescribe fertilizer programs, and with even better success than just using the simple chemistry test to come up with prescriptions for fertilizers. So just want to mention that. And another thing that I don't know if anybody here is doing sap analysis, but we look at tissue analysis. And then the next level, what could even correlate, well, it is showing to even correlate even perhaps better. Again, more work needs, more scientific work, more academic research could go in this direction, is looking at actual plant sap analysis. But there's so few labs. I mean, there might be one lab in the United States right now doing it. I don't know if anybody here is sending samples away to do sap analysis, or anybody is here developing a lab that could possibly do this, but this was also really interesting. And then from there, when we have more data, now we have more data to work with to actually come up with prescriptions to better manage our soils, including the use of using minerals to balance our soils, various things, everything from compost tea, to microbial inoculants, which sometimes compost just isn't practical at all. Sometimes it could be, but the microbial inoculants could come in and you replenish again, kind of like a probiotic for humans, like inoculating our soil. And then the importance of having living roots in the ground for as much of the year as possible. And here's where our cover crops come in, and just diversified ecosystem. So I think I might skip this really quick. I know we don't have a lot of time left, but just want to, for those unfamiliar with nutrient cycling and the role that biology plays, is that soil biology is an essential role, plays an essential role in nutrient cycling. It's those enzymes from fungi and bacteria that break away and weather our rock in soil, and they are basically contributing to the mineral and exchangeable pools, I should say in the exchangeable pools of our soil. So like I mentioned here, if this is new to you, maybe some students that haven't, I'm not sure if that was in your soils requirement or not, but there's basically 3 main pools of nutrients in the soil. The mineral is the biggest pool, and that's basically, those are our minerals. Those are our rocks that break down over time and become soil. But this is not available to plants. We can have a lot of calcium, we can have a lot of whatever mineral, phosphorus in our soil, but unless it's in plant available form, the plants can't take it up. The exchangeable pool is what the microbes can help with, exchanging that, and then the soluble is that's a readily available to plants. That's what the paste saturation test can tell us. It's like what's immediately available to our plants. And that's where this test, I like this test because it tells us that as we go into the growing season. But it's this nutrient cycling that happen through the biology. And so when we start to see a lack of biology in our soil, we're not having that nutrient cycling, and more then we have to rely on inputs to fertilize our plants. All of the world's soils, well, this is a little bit debatable, but all of the world's soils contain all the nutrients for plant life. There are some soils that really do not. They might be lacking zinc or something that needs to be added. But by and large, the work of Sparks, et cetera, if we can just tap into those minerals, that is what we want. That is what we want to do. And that's where some of these tests come in to really tell us like what is in the soil. And not only that, but this is also a publication from the University of Georgia. But these are examples of organisms that have been also shown to be biofertilizers. So again, just more evidence here that we've got our, rhizobia, azobacter, et cetera, pseudomonas, et cetera, mycorrhiza fungi, all of these things that are in our soil doing a job. So biology enables fertilization in nature, and thus is a source of fertility in cultivated systems. Okay, so I just want to share a few, now just kind of switching gears a little bit, kind of talking about some images from my own work. So this actually is something that I dabble with. This is my home garden, little market garden. And conserving water is just such an issue, of course, here in Texas. We have extremes, and I've toyed with all these different, we were talking about over lunch, all these different coverings, just not leaving the soil bare. But if you're a grower, if you're a farmer, if you're a researcher, you're a student trying to get your graduate degree, you just don't have time to go out there and mulch all the time, et cetera. There's just certain things that work better. And what I've found is that this landscape fabric, again, it's plastic fabric, but it is remarkable in conserving water. The water that my irrigation water, I don't have a rainwater collection system yet, and the water is terrible. Just over like 3 years, pH of my soil is increasing. I'm really dealing with a lot of plant health. So really want to like minimize irrigation. So this has been a game changer. And the white side of this is black on one side, the white side is up. Really helps in the summer. And it was able to keep the soil so cool that I was still producing quite a lot of tomatoes in August 2 years ago. That was like the really brutal split. They're all kind of becoming brutal summers, but that was a couple years ago. I toyed with using, because I was doing some hemp research for a while, and I thought, well, what if there could be more hemp fabric? What if we could bring some of this stuff back? This was jute, actually. I thought, okay, well, what about more of like an organic product to use as a covering? It just didn't hold up well. It just degraded too quickly, which led me back to just using this landscape fabric that can last for like 10 years. So it's all about trade-offs, right? In horticulture and agriculture, it's whatever tools make sense in your context. So then that leads me also to one of the things that I do at Texas State is I manage our student farm. It's called Bobcat Farm. That's our mascot. Sometimes people don't know that, and they scratch their head. I've even been asked, well, do you farm bobcats? I think that seriously. Anyway, so Bobcat Farm, what I a few years ago started with was here on the left, and it was just classic hill country, clay, not only clay, but compacted. It'd been overgrazed. This is a 3,500 acre ranch that was basically, donated to the university, and we run cattle, have goats, but I got a donation and started up the student farm, and it's been delightful, but it's also been a case study in how to deal with our context. Now, I didn't have 10 years like some maybe folks do to regenerate the soil using animal impact and cover crops and all this stuff, right? So we did bring in soil, we did hugelculture, but on the what we did after just one season was this, which was quite remarkable. And again, straw, not leaving the soil bare, and it was just a great teaching moment for the students. But this also just shows you the challenges of not only do we have clay, but we've got like this soil grows rocks. Previously, we had this, there was a student farm here before, and then it was just dormant for 5 years because it failed. I mean, or people got too like burnt out and tired. And I think that the rock picking was really like a demoralizing as well for the students. Just like they grow rocks. And we even tried like we tried to till, but it just we can till, and then it just those fine clays, and it just collapses back down. It was like, the tillage doesn't last very long. The benefits of it doesn't last very long. So this is the irrigation trench, just showing like what we're dealing with. And this is our hoop house that we built in the background. And this shows you an aerial photo of what we were working with. And then here we are 2.5 years later. So brought in a ton of local organic matter that would otherwise just end up in landfills, or this is all over on the left here. These are all wood mulch. So flagging down local arborists and just mulching everything. Just instead of them, taking these trucks elsewhere, they're just bringing it to us for free. Then we also get in just bags and bags of leaves from local landscapers, and we make leaf mold, which is one of these pods over here. And we've got some Johnson Sioux bioreactors as another composting method. And then our research plots are here. We've got 3 rows of blackberries here, putting up a shade tunnel here, working with J.C. Lewis to put in raspberries there. That's coming. And then we do have a little biochar production unit there. We use tarps to get rid of our silage tarps to get rid of our aggressive weeds. I say weeds, but aggressive grasses like Bermuda and Johnson grass and things like that, just to make it all bare, and then we start building our soil from there. This is what the research beds look like, just a little bit more of a close-up, and you can see we're just using all of the mulch. Again, we did bring topsoil and compost in, and this is the current research. It's not a very good picture here, but this is tomatoes basically in those beds, and that's a biochar experiment, which is we're actually doing some different soil amendments with adding biochar. The treatments are, biochar with compost, different compost, biochar with different microbial inoculants, just to take soil samples and plant tissue samples, plant sap analysis samples over time. And then on the left here is our blackberries. Again, similarly, we're mounding up because we had to, because of, you saw the native soil was rough. And these blackberries are, so this is going to be a rotating trellis, rotating arm trellis, and then these are just some of the traditional trellising. And with that, so just back to a little bit of the biochar. This was now just going back in history a little bit to look at, again, this is where the farm started. But this was back in 2020, I believe. But what I want to draw your attention to here is all of these piles. These are actually slash piles. So one of the major things that has been going on at Freeman Ranch is encroachment by species like mesquite and huisache and juniper. And the ranch director has gone out and just started bulldozing and clearing to open up this rangeland for cattle grazing, And so what he has done is he's not even like 1/3 done with this project. We have 500 slash piles all throughout the ranch, and he was just going to burn them. And I thought, well, why don't we make biochar? Put it back into, it's very, ambitious, but let's see what we can do. So that's what we're attempting to do right now is, and actually Prairie View A&M is doing something similar where they got an equipment grant and they're trying to make biochar. This is, in rural areas, but in urban areas too, we have so much biomass, and it either gets mulched out, which is good, but a lot of times in rural areas it gets burned. And it could be turned into more of a carbon sequestering product and then put back into the soil. And now, for the first time, the landscape is really changing with biochar. There's more kind of momentum with the NRCS code 336 to actually pay landowners, farmers, and ranchers to put biochar back into their soil. So this could be a game changer. Maybe this might work. Maybe the economics is going to be favorable that we could actually do some of this. All right, I know I'm out of time. So thank you so much. I know I hit on a lot of things. I don't know is there time for questions? Yes, okay. So I appreciate your yes,
Really enjoyed your talk. Thank you for coming.
thank you.
We focus so much on our agricultural soils and their tie to water cycles.
Mhm.
But what about our urban environments?
Yeah.
And obviously some of these practices could carry over to individual landowners, but I'm just wondering, to what extent are the local rainfall cycles driven by agriculture
Yeah,
versus by cities? And
right.
so are we actually working on the right problem?
I think that there's multiple ways to address this issue. And while my talk really focused on agriculture, kind of because of more of the work that I'm just doing at Texas State right now, but our biggest irrigated crop in the whole country is turf. And so when we talk about water cycles, that's huge. And a lot of people are managing these in urban places. So one of the future research directions I want to go, which is why I'm meeting some turf people tomorrow here, is thinking about the soil in some of our developments that would have the capacity to hold on to more water. If we did something with when we prepare developments, like housing developments, they're putting biochar in tree plantings in, Stockholm. I mean, they're doing things around the world that I think are really interesting that could be a huge, that more and more researchers are looking at too. But I agree with you completely. I think that the urban setting is really important. All of our parks, our golf courses, et cetera, a lot of management goes into those. And so if we then take this more agro-ecosystem approach to those, managing those, I think that could be hugely beneficial.
I actually had a question
Yeah.
for you. So I know the term like regenerative agriculture is thrown around a lot. From the consumer perspective, are there any like certifications that these growers can get that are ensure that they're actually
Yeah.
doing these practices?
There's a couple different certifications that are being developed. I believe I haven't really followed it so closely because, of course, the certifications have their pros and their cons. But I believe the Rodale Institute is instrumental on one of these, and I know Gabe Brown is working on one. I don't know if it's with Rodale or not, but people are definitely working on this. That's a great question.
Okay. Are there any like other things besides certifications that we can look for as consumers that might want this
Oh, it's a tough one. It's really tough. It's so complex. I mean, growing plants is so complex. And then, William Albrecht, soil scientist decades ago, would already say like a carrot is, you have two carrots, but they could be very different, but we may not know that, right? Like in terms of their nutritional profiles. I think that this is also where it's not maybe practical always, but the whole like know your farmer, know these growing methods. But I don't really have a great answer for that. Maybe somebody else does.
You're creating biochar that obviously requires a lot of carbon. It takes a lot of energy to break something down to
Yeah.
that level. So when you're talking about, just like we were talking about having a mobile operation
Yeah.
that doesn't generate biochar somewhere else, to do that in an economical manner
Mhm.
is still carbon neutral.
You're right, right. So that's being looked at. So one of the things about these bioreactors is that we're being designed to also run on the syngas that's being captured. So once you light that fire, there's energy there. That energy is being captured then to fuel the whole process so that we can reduce the energy requirement of it. So that's a technology that's really fascinating in the engineering space. That's also being looked at, and the whole life cycle analysis of that carbon.
All right, if there aren't any other questions, we will head out for light refreshments in the area outside. But overall, we just want to thank you
Thank
for
you so much.
presenting.